好，今天是2020年10月30日，这里是时事晚知。喜欢本频道内容的朋友，请点击订阅，谢谢。美国宣布对台湾出售总额逾20亿美元的武器，中国马上宣布制裁措施。此次军售对于台海实战会带来什么影响？中国的制裁又是否具阻吓力？
China has spoken out after the US approved another arms deal between the US and Taiwan. That would be worth over $2 billion. Well, this would be the second arms deal between the US and Taiwan in recent months. The first, worth $1.8 billion, was approved earlier this month and prompted Beijing to sanction the US arms manufacturers involved. US relations with Taiwan have grown just as they have soured with Beijing. Taiwan says it will continue to develop its defence capacity in the face of China's military expansion. Well, I'm joined now by Bonnie Glaser, the director of the China Power Project at the Centre for Strategic and International Studies. Thanks very much for being with us. So what do you think this move means?
Well, I think that China always objects to U.S. arms sales to Taiwan, but under a law that was passed in the United States in 1979 called the Taiwan Relations Act, every administration is required to sell arms to Taiwan to defend itself. And frankly, the threat from China is growing, and there is enormous bipartisan support in Congress for selling more arms to Taiwan.
So given that support, that will clearly be seen as a provocation in China. What's China's aim here?
Well, China is trying to defend its sovereignty and not appear weak to its domestic public. But frankly, the Chinese government knows that the United States will continue to sell weapons to Taiwan to defend itself. This particular time, China has threatened to impose sanctions. This is the third or fourth time that China has threatened to impose sanctions on U.S. companies. But frankly, most of these companies are not selling, of course, arms to Beijing, and they're not even doing much commercial business with China. It was quite notable, in fact, that China only said that it would sanction Boeing's defense unit and not the commercial side of the company. So it looks like China is keeping its own interests at the forefront of its mind.
Now, that's interesting. And I want to get into the detail of the weapons themselves. What's going on there?
Well, the United States has actually sold some offensive capabilities this time around, which is somewhat of a departure from the past. For example, standoff land attack missiles, high mobile artillery rocket systems. These provide Taiwan with counter-strike missile force, which they can use to hit ports, airfields on China's coast, which would degrade the PLA's ability to conduct operations against Taiwan. So they would only be used to retaliate, to slow down an attack. There's also in this new weapons package coastal defense cruise missiles, which are a real game changer. They can be mounted on trucks, they can scoot and shoot, and they can try and hit at amphibious landing vehicles, other transport vehicles that are trying to move large numbers of troops to invade Taiwan. So they're to prevent the PLA from landing on the beach.
Bonnie, thank you so much for talking us through what's going on there with that arms deal. We really appreciate it. Bonnie Glaser.
Thank you.
Next, the US has also signed a military agreement with China's regional rival, India. India and the US have agreed to share sensitive satellite data. This is all against a backdrop of India's military standoff with China in the Himalayan region of Ladakh. The announcement came during high-level talks in Delhi between America and India. Here's US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo.
Our leaders and our citizens see with increasing clarity that the CCP is no friend to democracy, the rule of law, transparency, nor to freedom of navigation, the foundation of a free and open and prosperous Indo-Pacific. I'm glad to say that the United States and India are taking steps to strengthen our cooperation against all manner of threats, and not just those posed by the Chinese Communist Party.
Rajini Vaidyanathan is in Delhi.
Well, the deal that was done today between India and the US, the Basic Exchange Cooperation Agreement, is certainly seen as something that will strengthen ties between India and the US because it allows them to share information when it comes to maps and geospatial data, when it comes to military operations. So that's seen as a huge boost. But the wider context of this visit, where you have two leading US cabinet ministers, is all about countering China's growing influence in the region. I mean, just think about it. You've got the US Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, you've got the US Secretary of Defense, Mike Esper, who are flying halfway across the world during a pandemic, a week before a presidential election, for these talks. And that just shows you how important this is to the administration. Now, having left India, they're now in Sri Lanka. They will then go on to the Maldives and then Indonesia, and those last three countries that I mentioned all have very good relationships and strong ties with Beijing. So this is all about trying to contain and counter China's growing influence in this region. And it's worth also mentioning that only a few weeks ago, Mike Pompeo's deputy, Stephen Biegun, the Deputy Secretary of State, made a visit to Bangladesh. Bangladesh, another country that has close ties with Beijing. It was the first time that a senior US official has visited Dhaka for close to a decade.
中国科技部部长王志刚提供了更多关于中国经济规划的细节。他称，这是5年规划第一次对科技规划进行专章部署。他说，我们要提高自主创新能力，因为关键核心技术是要不来买不来的。另外，中央财经委员会官员韩文秀说，在美国和中国之间彻底脱钩是不现实的。美国国务卿蓬佩奥星期四10月29日再次对中共当局迫害新疆维吾尔穆斯林、践踏宗教自由的行为造成破坏，称中共是对宗教自由未来的最严重的威胁。
To the future of religious freedom is the Chinese Communist Party's war against the people of all faiths, Muslims, Buddhists, Christians, and Falun Gong petitioners alike. The atheist Chinese Communist Party is trying to convince the world that its brutalization of Uyghur Muslims in Xinjiang is necessary as a part of its counterterrorism efforts or poverty alleviation, depending on which audience that they are speaking to. I know that the Chinese Communist Party is trying to convince Indonesians to look away from the torments your fellow Muslims are suffering. I know that these same CCP officials have spun fantastic tales of happy Uyghurs eager to discard their ethnic, religious, and cultural identities to become more modern and enjoy the benefits of CCP-led development.
美国国家安全顾问奥布莱恩说，我们都看到了中国越来越民族主义，更加重商主义，更加专制，更致力于马克思列宁主义。他们并没有随着时间的推移变得越来越和我们一样。10月28日在华盛顿智库哈德逊研究所演讲时表示，
President Trump's bold leadership style has proven to be key as we build a new international consensus against China. The president was the first major leader to recognize that the old conventional wisdom, holding that it was only a matter of time before China would liberalize, first economically and then politically, was wrong. And instead, we've all watched China become more nationalistic, more mercantilistic, more authoritarian, and more committed to Marxism-Leninism over time. They haven't become more like us.
本期视频内容源于美国之音中文网、华尔街日报中文网、BBC News 中文。